item number 11, which is WD20221639, land west of Asprey Lane, south of Hurtis Hill, Crowborough. Officers, have you an update at all? No? Right, I have 3 speakers on this agenda item. The first is Andrew Wilson, who is a neighbour, and he will be speaking against. Mr. Wilson, you will have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Is the microphone working? Can everyone
hear
me?
Yes, it's got a little red light on it. So
fantastic. With respect to drainage, Asprey Lane has known surface water flooding issues, yet this full application has no detail whatsoever on surface or foul drainage. Following a Freedom of Information request, when the officer refused to disclose his discussions with Wealden District Council drainage voluntarily, we now know that the agent pushed strongly from the outset for a pre-commencement condition in place of appropriate testing. This was despite the drainage officer's strong recommendation that a test and information be provided up front to avoid future issues. A test was refused by the agent, citing excuses of a landlocked site and potential complaints. When the drainage officer was asked if they could confirm that they were content with a pre-commencement condition to deal with drainage, they responded that they were not sure they were content with such a condition, yet the planning officer put one in anyway. Rejecting every opportunity to prove their drainage strategy is viable, no reasonable justification to use a condition contrary to MPPF 56 exists, with lack of detail engaging CS2 and MPPF 167. Lack of surface or foul drainage proposals is a material failing supporting refusal. You are all aware of the nearby Article 4 directions with regards to environmental impacts. The officer is right that the proposal will change the site. Most of the hedgerow and tree line on the western side of the lane would be uprooted for the visibility splay, far in excess of what was initially proposed in the application literature and totally altering the character of the lane, contrary to EN 27. Irreversible damage would be done by concreting over priority habitat and urbanising the site. The site was also pre-cleared, as confirmed by the applicant.
If you could sum up in 1 sentence, please.
Sure. On balance, I would contend that the environmental impact is negative, and that should weigh heavily in the planning balance. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. The second speaker is Rachel Smith, who is also a neighbour. You two will have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Firstly, I'd like to cover social benefits. The officer attributes significant weight to housing undersupply, stating the proposal would make a modest contribution to housing need. I understand housing register demand is predominantly for 1 and 2 bedroom dwellings and not the 3 and 4 bed units, valued in excess of £700,000 proposed here. The site is way in excess of an appropriate walking distance to local amenities. The nearest supermarket is over 1,500 metres, post office just under 1,700 metres. No public transport passes through Asprey Lane and the nearest options are limited and infrequent. Further evidence of the unsustainable location is application of East Sussex County Council's home to school transport policy. Their road safety team assessed a child's walking route via Asprey Lane as presenting road safety hazards and unsuitable to walk. That's even when accompanied by an adult. This was highlighted in numerous objections, yet doesn't feature in the officer's report. Not being an accessible scheme to all, including the disabled, due to the lack of footway, is at odds with NPPF paragraph 111 and EN 27. Amenity value. The woodland has significant public amenity value, recently recognised by 2 Article 4 directions placed on woodland in the lane within 200 metres of the site. Economic considerations. I would contend the economic benefits of the proposal are tenuous at best. The officer acknowledges any likely benefit would be to the town of Crowborough, a view apparently not shared by the town council as they objected. The seal contribution is minimal, so I believe putting moderate weight to this factor is not justified. In summary, the scheme would have negligible impact on housing supply shortage, yet results in environmental damage and in an arguably unsustainable location. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And my final speaker is the agent, Martin Hull, who is speaking in favour. Mr. Hull, you will also have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. The site is considered to be in a highly sustainable location relative to Crowborough and would help meet the need for new homes in the area, taking into account the council's lack of a 5-year housing land supply. Looking at the surroundings, there's detached and semi-detached houses to the north and east of the site, and so this small development of 4 new homes would fit in well with the locality. Drainage concerns have been raised, but the site and its adjacent land to the west is large enough to accommodate proper attenuation. Normally, for a small scheme such as this, soakage tests can be secured by planning condition, and this is a standard way forward. Recently, we have noted that the drainage ditch along the road and the drain gullies within it are blocked, which has likely caused some of the surface water runoff problems noted by objectors. The Highway Authority are normally responsible for clearing highway drainage. The applicant consulted widely with the council's tree and biodiversity officers in preparation of the proposals, and the site is situated in a non-designated landscape. The development retains the best of the existing trees, and there is scope to manage the site and its adjoining land to deliver real ecological and biodiversity enhancements. Overall, we feel that the right design solution is to allow the existing soft landscaping to dictate the layout and the number of homes. The setback of the development from the road and the retention of much of the frontage trees, together with opportunities for new planting, is considered to be a sensitive design solution. We would therefore like to commend this application to members. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And the local member is Councillor Waller. Welcome, Councillor Waller.
It's very nice to be back here at Planning Committee North today, despite being told by 2 members I'm on the naughty step. So I'd like to bring 6 matters to the committee's attention. Firstly, development boundary. The site lies outside any development boundary and within the countryside. The principle of residential development would therefore not be acceptable having regard to local planning policy, and is contrary to policies GD2, DC17 and EN27 of the Wealden Local Plan 1998. I do note that the council does not have a 5-year housing land supply, but restraint on unsustainable rural housing is registered under the MPPF, and as such the rural restraint policies can be afforded some weight by this committee. The scale, layout and density of this site is incongruous and out of keeping with the rural setting of Asprey Lane. Asprey Lane is approximately 1 mile in length and has just 11 properties. The proposed development, by virtue of its scale, layout and very high density, measured against existing Asprey Lane density, would have a detrimental impact upon the character and appearance of the verdant countryside location. Being in close proximity to, although not within the AONB, and with no exceptional circumstances advanced that the development is in the public interest, it would be contrary to the objectives set out in SAVE policies EN1, EN6 and EN27, and spatial planning objectives SPO1, SPO13 and policy WCS14. Officer and Highways comments made recently demonstrate the entirety of Asprey Lane is unsustainable location for new residential development. This is important from an MPPF context, social test. This objection is made in the context that East Sussex County Highways have not objected to this application, but have merely commented upon parking requirements, but failed to comment on the suitability of Asprey Lane itself. These comments I'm about to make are taken from a recent officer refusal of a larger application on Asprey Lane, which is 1/8 of a mile from the application site, just 1 furlong. And I quote, "Asprey Lane is a narrow country lane that cannot easily accommodate 2-way traffic and has a lack of passing places. The lane is unsuitable to serve the proposed development by reason of its narrow width, poor alignment and lack of footways. Furthermore, East Sussex County Council Highways on the same refused application stated, and I quote, this rural location is too detached from the built form of Crowborough town and lacks any accessible means to reach essential local amenities or workplaces other than by private car. Schools, public transport provision, railway services and the town centre are too distant to walk, and cycling is an option for only the most proficient cyclists. Asprey Lane is not suitable for walking due to its alignment and lack of pedestrian facilities. The proposed development is contrary to paragraphs 110, 111 and 112 of the MPPF. Finally, East Sussex County Council Education Department insists that all school children in Asprey Lane should receive the benefit of the Taxi to School scheme, and I quote, the child cannot reasonably be expected to walk the route to school because the nature of the route is unsafe to walk. I assert that if it's unsafe to walk for a child, then it is unsafe to walk for everyone. Officers have argued that this site is sustainable and have used this argument to support the recommendation for approval. I would invite this committee to disagree, using precedent from the highway and officer comments from the site 1/8 of a mile away, and by citing saved policies TL3 of the Wealden Local Plan and paragraphs 110, 111, 112 and 130 of the MPPF. Wealden officers' position regarding the destruction of hedgerows and arboriculture and the impact on biodiversity is inconsistent with recent planning decisions and the protective action taken by Wealden in Asprey Lane. Again, this is important for the environmental test of the MPPF. Development would require the removal of approximately 100 metres of hedgerow, mature trees adjacent to Asprey Lane, and requires significant site clearance. In addition, the works to maintain a visibility display will result in constant cutting back and management of countryside hedgerow, which would have an unacceptable visual impact on the verdant nature of this narrow country lane. Officers have argued that there will be a biodiversity net gain and have used this argument to support the recommendation for approval. I would invite this committee to disagree. The basis of this calculation of biodiversity net gain is to be disputed. Was it taken from the pre or post site clearance standpoint? And in view of the
could you sum up, please, Councillor Waller?
Madam Chairman, I have got 2 more points to make. Could I ask for an extension, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you. And in view of the residents of Asprey Lane falls well short of the biodiversity net gain required by the Environment Act. I probably will be about another 3 minutes. Is that okay? I would further argue that Wealden recommending approval of this development whilst protecting swathes of Asprey Lane with not 1 but 2 Article 4 directions is illogical. This application site is adjacent to a priority habitat of ancient semi-natural woodland, and the Article 4 direction states, if permitted development rights are exercised on an area of ancient semi-natural woodland, this will result in significant adverse visual impact within the rural area of the district. Perhaps officers would like to confirm how common it is to issue an Article 4 direction and how many they have issued in their collective careers. Perhaps officers could explain why 2 near identical sections in terms of arboriculture and biodiversity of Asprey Lane are being afforded such contrasting levels of environmental protection from WDC. This committee asked for consistency of approach, but is sadly lacking on this occasion, and precedent just set just a few months ago is being broken with this recommendation. I was going to go on to talk about drainage,
Please
but
don't.
that point
Please
has already
don't.
been made.
Yes, I think you've done well.
Basically, I asked this committee to come to a different subjective view than that of the officer and to refuse this application.
Thank you very much indeed. Officers, you have a lot to unpack just there. Would you like to come back, or would you like me to take it to the committee?
Very briefly, Madam Chairman, I'm not going to propose to counter everything that Councillor Waller has said. I mean, ultimately, it's for members to form a view on all those points. But there are accusations of inconsistency, and we've had attention drawn both by the public speaker and Councillor Waller to the very recent refusal of planning permission and why we refused that and why this is before you. And really the answer lies in the screen, the image which has been on the screen for a little while. The refusal which we've heard about is further down Asprey Lane. I mean, getting into specifics and how far it is, I don't actually think is that helpful. Members will know, I am sure, that not very much further past this site, Asprey Lane turns into a very attractive and more rural lane. It's banked in parts, very traditional detail as you go down the lane and out of Crowborough on this particular route. Whilst this site that you see is still on, its address is still on Asprey Lane, and it is outside the development boundary, it's right at the top by Hurtis Hill and the junction with Whitehill Road. And therein lies the difference between the two, because the two sites are considered to be materially different. But then it's for members to consider. 2 further very brief points. It is rare for the council to issue Article 4 directions in the district in regard to the ones that pertain locally to the area. Those were where we had evidence of unauthorised development and plotlands at that, and therefore the Article 4 direction sought to protect the protected landscape and features of the sites which are around Asprey Lane. It doesn't include the application site, which is not in the protected area. It merely abuts. The other point, which I think is a crucial one, and I suspect we will probably get into, but I'll get in first while I've got the mic. It's this business of is there sufficient information, and particularly in regard to drainage. And it's a question of proportionality. I mean, we've spent a lot of time today talking about controlling conditions, and Grampian ones at that, on major forms of development, and or pushing developers to provide information up front so that you've got it as a committee. What the report explains is that for a relatively small site and for a few dwellings, is it proportionate to demand that information now? Well, members are going to express that view in a second when we get into the debate. The officer view is that, bearing in mind the scale of development, it is possible to control those aspects by planning condition. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Can I just ask you, therefore, this is outside the development boundary, as has been stated. And there are obviously some drainage issues going on here. Attenuation ponds, drainage ditches blocked. I understand that's highways it's East Sussex County Council, that's their department. There are a whole list of things that no public transport, not in a sustainable location, large houses, which we are trying not to have too many of. What are we doing about in half of those issues? I don't want to take all the questions that I know everyone is raring to give.
I mean, that's the point, Madam Chairman. I mean, I can answer. I mean, it abuts. It is outside, but abuts. I mean, you can see on the screen that the very tip of the site touches the development boundary. And maybe you say that's specious. It's nonsense. It's either in or out. The policies pertain to each location. To be clear, it is outside the development boundary. And a bit like the speakers said and Councillor Waller set out, the local plan tells you as councillors that this should be refused planning permission. But that's just the starting point. You then have to look at material considerations and weigh and balance those as to whether it justifies taking a contrary view to the local plan. And we sit here most months doing exactly that. We're inviting you to do that and weigh and balance these points. I mean, you've been invited by some of the speakers in addressing you to afford less weight than officers have done within the report that's set out for you. So members, I think, have got that point. Public transport, and in particular pedestrian connectivity. I mean, I think it's Councillor Waller that made the point that East Sussex have only looked at parking. They did look at access as well. There was an initial objection, but that's been resolved with some supplementary information. There are no footpaths past this site, and for the stretch from the proposed access to the top of the lane where it meets Curtis Hill and Western Road and Whitehill Road, there is a short section which has no footways, and then towards the junction there's a hard surface area at the junction where I've personally seen people walk to. And then in terms of public transport, there is then the closest bus stop is a little bit further up on Whitehill Road before you get to the junction with Herne Road. So it's not immediate, it's not right on the doorstep of the site, but they're not a million miles away in Wealden terms. And by that I mean we talk about sites dislocated from town centres and not immediately approximate to public transport all the time at the area committees. This is actually quite close, albeit there isn't a specific footway. The rest of the matters are really for you as members as a committee as to whether there is sufficient information or not, and whether you're prepared to grant planning permission subject to conditions or not. Whilst I'm waffling on about that, depending upon where the debate goes, I mean, I don't want to undermine the recommendation. We thought long and hard about this. But ultimately, if members feel that the site can be developed, but you want to see more information, that's not a refusal, that would be a deferral. Thank you.
Councillor Moss.
Thank you. I've got I agree basically with all the things that have been said about this site. I think it's completely unsustainable. I noticed that the sustainability, it talks about in the report from the developer about you can shop at the the Fairbank Shopping Centre. Well, I'm not sure where that is in Crowborough. I assume they mean the Fernbank Centre. And then I noticed leisure, Emma Davis Gardens, and I thought, I've lived in Crowborough for 37 years. This must be a gem that I've not come across.
What did you say? What was it called?
Emma Davis Gardens.
I've never heard of it
No,
either.
so I googled it, and it's actually a garden design company in Crowborough. So I'm not sure what that says about the development. It's outside the development boundary. Alice Bright Lane is a narrow lane, and even though it might only be a short distance from the junction with the roundabout, it is long enough that obviously East Sussex County Council consider it an issue for children walking up there. It is a dangerous bit of road. The mini roundabout itself is dangerous because the traffic coming down from Whitehill Road is restricted because there's always cars parked on one side, so it becomes like a one-way area. It is out of keeping with the other houses in Alice Bright Lane, and I take issue with the fact I do think the whole of Alice Bright Lane is rather nice actually, not just the bit further down. There is a loss of trees, and the loss of hedgerows along the roadside for the visibility display I think is unacceptable, and I think it's contrary to GD2, DC7 and for EN27, and therefore I'd like to recommend refusal of this, please.
GD2, EN27
And DC17.
and DC17. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Cleaver. Would you like to speak?
No.
Thank you. Councillor Watts, you'd like to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with what indeed the local member and indeed Councillor Moss has just referred to the committee. I just really wanted to echo this thing about the type of housing. And the thing is that this is actually quite an important thing going forward, because when we're looking at 3, 4 bedroom or even 5 bedroom houses, these are not the type of housing that we need going forward. And I think it's actually a really important point. I wasn't quite sure if Councillor Cleaver was the seconder, but if he wasn't, I'm happy to second Councillor Moss.
Well, you can joint second if you really feel that strongly about it. Don't fight over it. No, don't fight over it.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Madam Chair, back to you.
Thank you.
Chairman, thank you. So I hear what members have said. I mean, ultimately, if there's to be a refusal of planning permission, those policies, EN27, GD2 and DC17, I mean, the latter ones refer to development outside development boundaries and resisting housing in such locations. EN27 is the general policy, safe policy in regard to the design and layout of development, and we would wrap around that a kind of loss of vegetation and impact on the character of the area. And if it's the will of the committee, we can make a point about the position of the site relative to, if you like, the closest footway, and the suitability of that. So we'd exercise a judgment within that reason, rather than specifically saying that the access point is unsafe in terms of vehicle manoeuvring and turning, because East Sussex have said that that is acceptable. So I'm content from what I've heard that if there's to be a refusal, we could do 2 reasons that talk to that. Just on this business of the scale of the houses, I don't want to be a sort of prophet of doom, but we don't have a policy that specifies a mix. Actually, that's not quite true. There is a saved local plan policy that demands a mix of accommodation for major dwellings on land inside development boundaries. This is neither of those. We will have a policy. We are drawing a policy. We've got a plan that we're working on, colleagues are working on. But as we sit here taking a decision, we might not like the scale of the dwellings, and it cuts across the best evidence that we've got. But I'm afraid there's no policy that we can point to that would help us in an appeal situation. We can make that point in passing in terms of the appeal statement, but in terms of pin-sharp reasons for refusal, leave it at impact on the character of the area and then the position relative to the highway and pedestrian connectivity. Thank you.
Councillor Moss, are you content with Mr. Robbins' statement?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Councillor Watts wants to come back.
Councillor Watts, do you want to come back?
I do. I just wanted to make it clear to Mr. Robbins, I wasn't inferring that we put it down as it is a passing comment, as it has come up in many committees about the types of housing that the council and the councillors who represent the public want to see going forward. That's all. Thank you.
I haven't forgotten you. Honestly,
You've been picked on, aren't you?
I am being picked on. Doesn't often happen. Actually, I completely agree. I have to say I'm not awfully keen on the design here either, but then I'm not keen on the whole thing. So, there you go. Councillor Waller, I will come back to you.
So I'll try and be quicker this time. So approval.
No, you will be quicker. You will try.
Approval was based. It was predicated on the lack of a 5-year housing land supply, and the officer recommendation argues that the benefit of this application demonstrably outweighs the harm. This is a subjective judgment which even our officers are not convinced by. Very limited weight is attributed to the environmental test in the MPPF, and only moderate weight is attributed to the economic test in the MPPF. I'm not a lexicographer, but the words demonstrable, very limited, and only moderate are antonyms rather than synonyms. Based on the representations made today by those objections to this application, I ask the committee to agree with me, and I think you have, that there is significant harm of this application demonstrably outweighs the benefits, and that refusal of this application would accord with the MPPF. I would ask Mr. Robbins to comment on whether the MPPF harm outweighing the benefit should also go down on the application, because I believe if this went to an appeal, because this is a subjective assessment made in the planning balance by this committee, an inspector would find it very hard to overturn this decision. Thank you.
Very quickly, Madam Chairman, so just to be clear, and for the benefit of all members and members of the public and those watching, when we have this situation and we ask you for sort of clarification of the key hooks of why there would be a decision to withhold planning permission, when we issue a decision notice, we would wrap that with the MPPF test and the relevant, significant and demonstrable, albeit argue it in the reverse, that in the view of the committee, the benefits weren't outweighed by the impacts, if that's the right way to put it. So yes, we would do that. I can't tell you what an inspector would say. That's up to the inspector, and I suspect we probably will have an appeal, but let's see what comes of that.
Thank you very much indeed. Right, I only have one proposal in front of me. That is for refusal, put forward by Councillor Moss, and seconded by Councillor Cleaver, and thirded by Councillor Watts. We have DC 17, GD 2 and EN 27 as the reasons. Are you content with that? All of those in favour of refusal?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It's unanimous, Chair.
That is unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Well done. Right.